I never imagined that after 40 years of marriage, the person I trusted most would look me in the eye and calmly try to take everything I had built. On Sunday morning, just before church, my husband Richard walked into the kitchen, holding a folder with our financial advisor Nathan, standing smugly at his side. Richard smiled like he was doing me a favor and said, "Honey, before we head to service, I just need a quick signature. It's a routine bank form for tax purposes. Standard procedure, nothing to worry about." Nathan added, "It's just a compliance update, Charlotte. Every high net worth account goes through this. I have signed many documents in my life. I inherited the first property from my mother and turned it into a real estate empire worth over $44 million. Yet somehow, these two men, one who vowed to love me until death and the other who claimed to manage our finances with care, believed I had no idea what my signature meant. As I reached for the pen, something in Richard's eyes changed. It wasn't love. It was greed. I opened the folder. At first glance, it appeared to be routine, but I noticed a clause at the bottom that stated, "Transfer of portfolio management and financial rights to Serena Blake." That was not a bank. That was not a corporate entity. That was the name of the woman I had recently seen wearing my husband's watch at a charity gala. The woman he described as just a networking consultant. A woman half my age who had been showing up in places she didn't belong. I looked at Richard and asked, "Why is Serena's name on my legal documents?" He froze. Nathan jumped in quickly. "It's just a placeholder name. Nothing to worry about." They were lying to my face. They believed I would panic. Instead, I smiled, because what neither of them knew was that less than 12 hours earlier, I had already moved every property, every account, and every asset out of my personal control. They were gone from my name, irreversible, untouchable. My husband thought I was about to sign away my life's work to his mistress, but before he tried to steal from me, I had already taken everything away from him. Before I reveal who I gave the $44 million to and how it completely destroyed my husband and his mistress, make sure you subscribe right now and comment where you are watching from. What I'm about to tell you will change how you look at trust, marriage, and power forever. My name is Charlotte Hayes. Most people know me as a quiet philanthropist, a woman who wears pearls to church and sits in the front pew with perfect. They assume my husband is the mastermind behind our wealth. They assume I was fortunate to marry into money. The truth is the opposite. I built everything we had. When my mother passed away, she left me one rental home in a declining neighborhood. Everyone told me to sell it and move on. Instead, I fixed it up, rented it out, and bought another, then another. I managed every contract, every tenant dispute, every loan. Richard was supportive in the beginning, but never involved. He liked to say, "We built this together in public," though he never lifted a single financial document in his life. I was raised on old values: loyalty, marriage, community reputation. I never questioned Richard because I believed that if you love someone, you give them grace. But in recent years, Richard changed. He began dressing differently, staying out late, taking mysterious phone calls whenever I walked into the room. When I asked him about it, he said, "Don't start acting paranoid, Charlotte. You're too old for jealousy." I didn't feel jealous. I felt insulted. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way he started speaking down to me, the way he casually asked if I ever planned to retire from managing the estate, the way Nathan, our financial advisor, kept pushing me to sign simplified estate documents. They began hosting meetings without me. Richard started introducing Serena at events as part of our strategic team. She touched his arm too often. She laughed too loudly at his jokes. And I saw the way she looked at me, not as his wife, but as an obstacle. Then I made a discovery that brought everything into clear focus. One evening, I entered Richard's office to leave a file on his desk. His computer was open to an email from Nathan. The subject line read, "Final transfer draft. Once she signs, Serena will assume control." My heartbeat went still. Not fast, not panicked, just still, as something inside me shifted forever. They were not just having an affair. They were trying to erase me, They thought I would sign whatever document they put in front of me. They thought age meant weakness. They forgot who I am. That night, I made a decision. I would not confront them. I would outsmart them. I contacted the one person I trusted above all, my godson Benjamin, a brilliant attorney who called me his second mother. Together, we created a plan that would not only protect my assets, but turn their betrayal into their downfall. Everything I had suspected was confirmed the moment I read that email. But what followed over the next several days revealed a deeper level of betrayal than I was prepared for. Richard and Nathan began orchestrating what I now understood to be a carefully designed financial trap. They started attending client dinners together without inviting me. And when I questioned Nathan about new transactions, he smiled and said, "Charlotte, these matters are too complex. At this stage in life, it's best if you let us streamline things for you. One signature, and you'll never have to worry about another business decision again." There it was, their end game. They were counting on me being tired, being old, being done. But I wasn't done. I was waking up. The more they plotted in the shadows, the quieter I became. I stopped asking questions. I pretended to be confused. I pretended to be fragile. I started shaking my hands slightly when reading documents, just enough to make Nathan say, "Here, let me walk you through it." I let them believe they were winning. Every time Nathan spoke to me, as if I were an elderly woman past her prime, every time Richard looked at Serena with that arrogant confidence, thinking he had found his future and I was his past, they were digging their own grave. Then came the day that changed everything. I found a document on Richard's desk titled Property Realignment Schedule. It listed every property we owned, apartment complexes, commercial plazas, beach rentals, and next to each property, under the new ownership column, was the name Serena Blake. My signature line was already printed on it. At the bottom, it read, "Upon signing, all property rights and income will be transferred immediately and irrevocably." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from a realization. This was not just betrayal. This was erasure. They were writing me out of my own life's work, expecting me to disappear quietly, but they were a day too late. That was the night I drove to Benjamin's home. It was past midnight, rain falling steadily against the windshield. When he opened the door, I handed him a sealed envelope. "It's time," I said simply. He nodded. There was no lecture, no pity, no hesitation. Benjamin quietly and efficiently filed the documents to transfer the entire $44 million real estate portfolio into the Charlotte Hayes Legacy Foundation, with Benjamin as trustee and my sister Loretta as the public face. The properties were no longer personal assets. They were charitable holdings, locked into an irrevocable trust, legally untouchable. Once filed, not even I could reverse them. This was not retaliation. It was liberation. The next morning, as if on cue, Richard and Nathan arrived at our home with fake warmth and fresh coffee. "We need your signature before church," Richard said cheerfully. "It's just a bank compliance form." I nodded, playing the role I had carefully crafted. As I signed the useless paper they presented, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. They believed the trap had sprung. They had no idea I had already burned the bridge behind me, leaving them stranded in their own. But one moment solidified the depth of their betrayal. As we walked to the car, I overheard Richard whisper to Nathan, laughing quietly, "By next month, Serena will be running everything. Charlotte won't even know what happened." That laugh turned something inside me cold. I realized I hadn't just been betrayed as a wife. I had been judged as irrelevant, disposable. But a woman who builds an empire is never disposable. She is dangerous when underestimated. And they were about to learn that the hard way. The church bells rang softly that morning, echoing across the courtyard as we stepped out of the car. But the sound no longer brought me peace. Richard walked beside me with the confidence of a man who believed his victory was moments away, while Nathan followed close behind, clutching a leather portfolio containing documents he thought would finalize their triumph. The air smelled of fresh rain, and the sky was still gray when Serena arrived moments later, stepping out of a sleek black car, her designer heels clicking confidently across the pavement. She greeted my husband with a touch that lingered too long to be innocent, and smiled at me as if I were a guest in her future estate. "Charlotte," she said sweetly, "this must be a proud day for you." I looked at her without blinking and replied, "Every day I wake up is a proud day." She didn't understand the weight of my words. None of them did. They believed they had orchestrated a flawless plan. I would sign a single paper, and by nightfall, everything I had built over 4 decades would belong to Serena, and eventually to the children she dreamed of having with my husband. We stepped inside a small conference room by the church, where Nathan spread out the documents on the table. "It's a formality," he repeated. "A simple transfer for tax benefits. You will retain your name as honorary chair, but Serena will manage operations." I could feel the smugness radiating from across the table. Richard sat back in his chair, arms folded, as if he were already celebrating his new life. Serena stood slightly behind him, one hand on his shoulder, staking her claim. For a moment, I glanced at the cross hanging on the wall, not as a symbol of ritual, but as a reminder of truth. Then I placed my hand gently on the paper, ran my fingers along the line where my signature was supposed to go, and asked, "Tell me, Richard, what made you believe I would be so easy to erase?" The room fell silent. Richard froze, the smile fading. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Serena's expression faltered. "What do you mean?" Richard said, forcing a laugh. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a single document. It was not what they expected. It was a filed and time-stamped legal declaration from the state attorney's office. I placed it in the center of the table. "This," I said calmly, "is confirmation that as of yesterday evening, every property in the Hayes real estate portfolio has been transferred to the Charlotte Hayes Legacy Foundation, a charitable trust that cannot be reversed, sold, or inherited." I watched as their eyes widened, reading the lines. "Serena," I continued, turning to her, "you were not going to inherit an empire. You were about to watch yourselves lose everything to veterans, single mothers, and displaced families, real people with real needs. My life's work will house thousands, not decorate your vanity." Serena lunged toward the papers in disbelief. "This is fraudulent. You had no right." I cut her off. "Every property was purchased with funds I inherited from my mother. I added your name, Richard, out of courtesy, not obligation. Every asset you touched was only yours because I allowed it. And last night, I ended that permission." Nathan, desperate to maintain control, tried to argue. "You can't do this without board approval." I leaned forward and whispered, "There is no board. There is only me, and now an irrevocable trust protected by federal law." The color drained from Richard's face as the reality set in. His voice shook with anger. "You ruined me!" he shouted. I stood up slowly, steady, powerful in my calmness. "No, Richard, you ruined yourself the day you tried to take what you never built. You tried to rewrite my story, but I'm the one holding the pen." Serena's mask of confidence finally shattered. She backed away from the table, her hands trembling. She had risked everything on Richard's promise, and now she was left with nothing. No property, no inheritance, no power. I walked toward the door, pausing only to look back one final time. "By the time this service ends," I said softly, "the media will receive the press release announcing the foundation. You wanted control, Richard. Now you have none. You wanted ownership, Serena. Now you own your loss." And with that, I stepped out into the gray morning light, not as a wife abandoned, but as a woman reborn through fire, carrying not bitterness, but justice. As I stepped out of that church conference room, I could hear their voices erupting behind me, Richard shouting in disbelief, Nathan cursing under his breath, Serena demanding answers as her fantasy of power collapsed in front of her. But none of that mattered anymore. The moment I walked into the sanctuary, the air changed. Not for them, but for me. The choir was softly practicing a hymn about truth being revealed in time, and as I made my way to the front pew, faces turned toward me. People nodded respectfully, unaware that the service about to begin would not be remembered for scripture, but for revelation. Because while Richard thought he would spend this morning celebrating the final stage of his plan to erase me, this was actually the morning the world would learn who he really was. At exactly 10:07 a.m., Benjamin, my godson, and now the legal trustee of the new foundation, stepped into the church wearing a calm, purposeful expression. He walked straight up to the pulpit, where the pastor usually stood, and said, "Before today's service begins, there is an urgent announcement at the request of Mrs. Charlotte Hayes." A hush fell over the congregation. Richard stumbled in behind him, breathless and pale, attempting to reach the stage. "Stop this now!" he shouted. Serena followed, her heels clicking frantically across the floor, her composure shattered. But before they could climb the steps, a deputy sheriff entered through the side door, holding a court order. The officer approached Richard first. "Richard Hayes," he said clearly, "you are being served notice of asset forfeiture and investigation into attempted financial fraud." Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped their Bible. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. Serena turned, ready to flee, but another officer stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ms. Blake, you are also under investigation as a knowing participant." Benjamin addressed the congregation with firm, clear words. "For months, there has been an attempt to illegally transfer charitable property for personal gain. Mrs. Hayes discovered this betrayal and has instead donated every property, totaling $44 million, to the Charlotte Hayes Legacy Foundation. This foundation will provide housing for widows, single parents, and veterans. Every penny will go to those in need." As he spoke, the projector lit up behind him, displaying legal documents, signed, notarized, and time-stamped. You could see the foundation's mission, photos of the housing projects already in development, and my sister Loretta, standing proudly at a ribbon-cutting ceremony from earlier that morning. The congregation erupted, not in outrage, but in applause. People stood. Some cried. A woman reached out and touched my shoulder, whispering, "Bless you." It became instantly clear that the power Richard had tried to seize would now lift thousands of lives instead. His reputation, once his greatest armor, now crumbled in front of everyone he had tried to impress. He turned to face the crowd, but no sympathetic eyes met his. Years of deception were laid bare in a single morning. Richard's voice cracked as he said, "Charlotte, you can't do this to me." But this was not something done to him. This was justice catching up. Serena, realizing there was no recovery, tried to compose herself and said loudly, "This is illegal. We were promised." But her words were drowned out by Benjamin stating plainly, there were no promises, only deception, and deception has consequences. The pastor, who had watched it all unfold silently, finally stood and said, "Today, we do not witness the fall of a marriage. We witness the rise of truth." His words struck every heart in that room. Richard was escorted out of the church, not as a respected businessman, but as a man exposed. Serena followed, her eyes blazing with the realization that everything she had built her life around was an illusion, one that had shattered beyond repair. But I remained seated, calm as ever, the quiet strength of my decisions settling into my bones. I had not destroyed them out of vengeance. They had destroyed themselves through greed. As the choir began to sing again, their voices rose with a power I had never heard before. It wasn't just music, it was confirmation. I bowed my head, closed my eyes, and whispered not a prayer for revenge, but one of gratitude. Gratitude that God had given me the wisdom to see truth when lies stood before me smiling. Gratitude that I had chosen legacy over pride. And gratitude that the story of my life would not end with betrayal, but with victory, purpose, and a new beginning for those who needed it most. After that day, the world I lived in did not collapse. It transformed. When the truth was revealed inside that church, it was not just the end of my husband's deception. It was the rebirth of my life's purpose. Richard moved out of our home within a week, not by my demand, but because he could no longer face the eyes of a community that once respected him. Serena's name vanished from every society event she once bragged about attending. News outlets began to cover the story not as a scandal, but as a testament to resilience. Headlines did not read "Billionaire Husband Exposed," but "Woman Donates Fortune to Save Thousands of Lives." Reporters flooded my mailbox asking for quotes, TED Talk invitations arrived, and nonprofits wanted guidance. But I declined every public spotlight. I did not do any of this to be praised. I did it to be free. And I did it to ensure my name would be remembered not as Richard's wife, but as the woman who stood against betrayal with grace, intelligence, and unstoppable conviction. The properties that were once symbols of my husband's greed were now sanctuaries. I attended the opening of the first housing community 2 months later. It was built on land that was originally meant to be transferred to Serena as her future estate. Instead, it now housed 24 widows, women who had lost everything and had nowhere to go. As I handed keys to one of the residents, a grandmother raising 2 grandchildren, she cried and held my hands. I prayed God would send someone, she said. I never thought he would send an angel in pearls. Her words struck deeper than any applause ever could. I realized then that every tear shed in heartbreak, every betrayal I endured, had been preparing me for this moment, for a higher calling I never would have reached without being broken first. Benjamin, my godson, became the face of the foundation, but the heart of it remained with me. Each week, I spent time at one of our properties, not as a figurehead, but as a neighbor. I helped paint walls, serve meals, and plant flowers. These were not acts of charity to me. These were acts of restoration. I was restoring parts of myself that Richard's lies tried to bury. And as I walked through those communities, I saw women laughing together, children playing without fear, veterans learning new skills in workshops built on land once earmarked for luxury condos Serena had planned to profit from. Their joy became my inheritance. As for Richard, the legal consequences of his actions came swiftly. Investigators uncovered years of hidden accounts and fraudulent transfers that Nathan had helped him orchestrate long before Serena entered the picture. His reputation was not only destroyed, it was erased. Serena tried to distance herself, but her own emails and recorded conversations were uncovered. She had not just been complicit, she had been a driver of the scheme. Their downfall was not loud and dramatic. It was slow, quiet, and irreversible. They watched everything they touched turn to dust, while the legacy they tried to steal rose higher than ever. Yet, the most powerful change was not in them. It was in me. I no longer walked into rooms wondering if I belonged. I no longer questioned my worth based on how someone else treated me. I had faced the deepest betrayal a wife could endure, and I had used it not as a reason to collapse, but as a reason to rise. I discovered a truth I wish every woman in the world could understand. Power is not in what you own. It's in what you can walk away from without losing yourself. The day we opened the 3rd housing complex, my sister Loretta stood beside me and said, "You could have chosen revenge. Instead, you chose restoration." I looked at her and replied, "I did not lose $44 million. I invested it in my freedom and in God's purpose for my life." And in that moment, I felt a peace I had never known during my marriage, not because I won, but because I no longer needed to. This story is not about the end of a marriage. It is about the beginning of a legacy, my legacy. And I hope every woman who hears it remembers, it is never too late to take back your life, rewrite your story, and build something that will outlive every lie told against you. If you believe no one should ever be betrayed and erased from their own story, subscribe right now and comment where you're watching from. Your voice matters. Let's build a community that stands for truth, dignity, and justice.